everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income. But what if I told you the answer isn't buried in politics? It's actually hidden in plain sight, in the economic data. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find the one key trigger that actually makes these checks a reality.
This is the big one. It's the question we're all asking. After everything we've been through, it just feels like everyone is wondering when, or even if, more help is ever going to be on the way. Well, instead of just guessing, we're going to look at the exact same signals the people in charge are watching. It's time to see what might really be coming over the horizon.
Okay, so before we can look ahead, we have to get one really important thing straight. And, it might not be what you want to hear, but believe me, understanding this is the absolute most critical piece of the entire puzzle.
And here it is. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many petitions get signed or how loudly people demand more help, none of that directly triggers a stimulus check. The one thing, the only thing that acts as the catalyst is the health of the U.S. economy. Period.
Now look, I know that might sound a little discouraging at first, but it's actually the complete opposite. It's empowering. It means we can stop getting caught up in all the political noise and start looking at the real data, the same stuff the policymakers are looking at. It changes everything from just, hoping for help to actually understanding the conditions that make that help necessary.
So, if it's all about the economy, what are those conditions? What should we be looking for? Well, this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, the economic trigger. Let's break down exactly how this thing works.
The key idea here is something called an inverse correlation. Now, don't let the fancy term fool you. It's actually super simple. Just think of a seesaw, right? When one side goes up, the other side has to go down. It's the same here. When the health of the economy goes down, the chances of the government sending out stimulus checks goes up. They move in opposite directions. Simple as that.
Think about it. When the economy is just humming along, jobs are everywhere, businesses are growing, there's basically zero chance of stimulus. And why would there be? You don't need to stimulate an economy that's already running hot. But when things start to slow down, when the economy looks like it's heading for a recession, that's when the whole conversation in Washington completely changes.
So what exactly should you be watching for? Well, here are the big 4 signals. First, rising unemployment claims. That's a big one. When more people are losing their jobs, it's a clear sign of trouble. Then you've got slowing growth and contracting business activity, which just means companies are making less and selling less. But honestly, the real flashing red light to watch for is the Federal Reserve. When they start cutting interest rates, you need to pay attention. They only do that when they see big trouble on the horizon and want to make it cheaper to borrow money to get things going again. These are the headlines that truly matter.
And look, this isn't just some theory somebody came up with. The data shows a crystal clear, repeating pattern throughout recent American history. It's kind of undeniable once you see it.
Let that sink in for a second. Every single major recession in the modern era has led to stimulus checks. That tells us that these payments aren't random acts of kindness. They're a standard, almost predictable response to a specific crisis, a major economic downturn. The playbook is there, and they've used it again and again.
Let's just walk through it. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had a recession. The response? $300 checks. Okay. 7 years later, 2008, the housing market completely collapses, triggering a massive global crisis. The response? $600 checks. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world. The response? $1,200 checks. Are you seeing the pattern here? A major recession hits, and boom, payments go out. It has happened every single time.
But hold on, because if we look just a little bit closer at those numbers, something even more interesting and kind of wild starts to pop out. It's not just that they sent checks, it's the amount of money that tells a whole other story. Okay, so the first time, in 2001, the baseline was set, $300.
Then in 2008, when the next big crisis hit, what happened? The amount exactly doubled to $600.
And in 2020? You already know where this is going. It doubled again to $1,200. I mean, come on, that's not a coincidence. That is a clear mathematical pattern playing out over 2 decades. Each payment was literally double the one that came before it.
All right, so now we're armed with the 2 biggest clues. We know about the economic trigger, and we've seen this incredible historical pattern. So what can we reasonably guess about what might be coming next?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we were to face another major recession in the near future, would the people in charge stick to this exact same doubling pattern that's held true for more than 20 years?
Well, if you just follow the math to its next logical step, you double $1,200 and you get $2,400. Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a prediction. It's just pointing out a very curious historical trend.
But it is a fascinating pattern to think about, isn't it? All of this really leads to one powerful, simple takeaway. If you want to have a real idea of what's coming, you can pretty much ignore the political shouting matches. The real answers are in the jobs reports, the GDP numbers, and what the Federal Reserve is doing. You now know exactly what to look for. The real signs that history shows us come right before these payments.
And here's one final crucial warning. When these things happen, they happen fast. I mean, think back to early 2020. In February, everything seemed pretty normal. By March, the entire world had changed. And by April, checks were already on their way. The shift from a stable economy to a crisis can happen in just a few weeks. When the dominoes start to fall, they fall quickly.
So, when you put it all together, history seems to show us that a major stimulus payment isn't really a question of if, but a question of when a recession forces the government's hand. The focus shifts away from waiting for politicians to make an announcement and toward watching the economy itself. So the real question I have for you is, now that you know what to look for, what economic signs will you be watching?
You know, there's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a fourth stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand. If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need. So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the jobs report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job, and average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health. So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more, well, much more targeted. See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else. So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently, maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects. Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy. So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession. The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching.
You know, remember those stimulus checks we all got a few years back? For some people, they were an absolute lifeline. For others, well, they were a nice little bonus. A really fascinating new study is asking a powerful question. What if we could have gotten a much, much bigger economic boost, but for a fraction of the cost? The answer, it turns out, lies in getting the money to the right people and doing it in a totally different way. So let's break down this idea for what might just be a smarter stimulus.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The proposal this study makes is for a recurring $2,000 monthly check. But wait, this isn't some money for everyone idea. Not at all. The entire strategy really hinges on who gets this check, and the data suggests that being super precise is the key to making it all work.
So to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to walk through 4 key parts. First, we'll look back at the stimulus dilemma from 2020 and 2021. Then, we'll uncover a key economic clue that is absolutely central to this new idea. After that, we'll compare the economic impact of spenders versus savers. And finally, we'll explore all the details of this proposal for a smarter stimulus.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the stimulus dilemma. You know, to figure out where we might be going, we first have to really understand where we've been. So let's take a look back at the lessons we learned from that last big round of stimulus payments.
So between 2020 and 2021, the government pushed out 3 big waves of stimulus checks, and the total price tag? A pretty staggering $850 billion. I mean, that's more than the entire economy of some countries. The whole goal was to jumpstart our economy, but a price tag that big raises a really important question. Did that money actually get spent in the right places, or did we kind of miss the mark?
Well, here were the core problems with that old approach. The checks went out to about 85% of the population. That means a huge chunk of that money went to people who, frankly, didn't really need it for their immediate expenses. Economists have a name for this. They call it the helicopter approach, just kind of dumping money across the landscape and hoping for the best. And the result? Well, not only was it super inefficient, but some studies suggest it added about 3 percentage points to the inflation that came later. There just had to be a better way.
And that leads us right into our second section, a key economic clue. See, researchers who are analyzing all this data found a secret to making stimulus way more effective. And it all comes down to understanding one simple but really powerful economic principle.
That principle is called the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, don't let the name fool you. It sounds really academic, but it's an incredibly simple idea. It just measures one thing. When you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you actually spend and how much do you save? That's the whole concept right there.
Let's just boil it all the way down. Forget the jargon for a second. NPC is really just asking this one simple question. How likely are you to spend the next dollar you get? That's it. And this simple question, it turns out, is the key to unlocking a much more effective stimulus strategy.
So this concept basically creates 2 very distinct groups of people. You've got folks with a high MPC. They're typically on lower incomes, so an extra dollar is very likely to be spent immediately on necessities. Then you have people with a low MPC. They're usually on higher incomes, so that extra dollar is way more likely to be saved or invested. Simply put, the less of a financial cushion you have, the more likely you are to spend new money right away. And that distinction, well, it changes everything.
Okay, so let's move on to Section 3 and see how this all connects. Spenders versus savers. Now that we understand what MPC is, let's actually apply it. Let's follow the money and see what happens when we give the same amount of cash to people on opposite ends of that spectrum.
Let's use that core member from the study, $2,000. Now, imagine two of these checks are sent out. One goes to a spender, someone with a high MPC. The other one goes to a saver, someone with a low MPC. The amount of money is exactly the same, but where it goes next tells two completely different stories about the economy.
The data for the person with the high MPC is pretty striking. When this person gets that $2,000, the vast majority of it, about $1,600, is spent within just 10 days. The rest of it, gone within a month. This means the entire amount gets injected directly back into the economy, buying groceries, paying rent, supporting local businesses. This is stimulus in its absolute purest form.
And you know, this is the perfect time for a little reality check. The whole purpose of a stimulus check is right there in the name, to stimulate. It's not designed to be a savings plan or a debt reduction tool. Its only job is to get money moving through the economy to keep everything going. Spending isn't a side effect of the program, it's the entire point.
So what happens when that same $2,000 check goes to a person with a low MPC, the saver? Well, the study found that they generally don't spend much of it at all. That money gets saved, or invested, or used to pay down a mortgage. From an economic stimulus perspective, that money is effectively taken right out of circulation. The source uses this great analogy. It's hoarded like a bunch of squirrels saving away nuts for the winter. And while saving is an amazing personal habit, it totally defeats the purpose of an economic stimulus.
So the crucial point is this. When the whole goal is to kickstart the economy, the government isn't looking for savers. It's looking for spenders. It needs people who will take that money and immediately put it right back into the system. And this is why that distinction between high and low MPC isn't just some academic theory. It's the absolute key to making a program like this work.
And this brings us to our final section, a smarter stimulus. Based on everything we've just laid out, the study proposes a completely different, much more targeted approach for the next time a major economic downturn happens. So here's the proposed model. Step 1, instead of that blanket helicopter approach, you surgically identify only the high MPC individuals. Step 2, you replace the one-off check with a sustained monthly payment. And the result is this amazing 1-2 punch. You get way more economic stimulation for every single dollar you spend, and you avoid that massive $850 billion price tag of the old method.
The benefits of this kind of model are really clear. The money goes directly to the people who need it the most and who will actually go out and spend it. This gives you a much bigger economic bang for your buck at a fraction of the total cost. And maybe the biggest shift here is moving from that one-time payment to sustained support, replacing what one person called a payment that was cool for 3 minutes with a predictable lifeline that can last for months.
So this all brings us to the final question. This model suggests we can have a stimulus that is cheaper, more effective, and much more targeted to the people who need help. It's a really powerful idea, and it's backed by a lot of data. The real question is, when the next economic crisis hits, will policymakers stick with that old helicopter approach, or will they be willing to embrace a smarter, more precise strategy? What we learned from the last crisis might just be the key to navigating the next one.
You've probably seen the headlines buzzing around. Something about a new payment for Social Security recipients? Well, we're going to break down exactly what that's all about. It's a proposal that's getting a ton of attention, and we need to talk about what it could actually mean for millions of people. Okay, let's get right into it.
Okay, so the number at the absolute center of this whole conversation is this, $1,400. And look, this isn't just some random figure pulled out of a hat. It is the exact amount at the heart of a new proposal aimed squarely at people on Social Security.
So what is this really? Well, there's a pretty influential advocacy group called the Senior Citizens League, and they're the ones pushing for what they call a one-time catch-up payment. Now, the key thing to understand right away is that this is not a permanent monthly increase. Nope. It's designed as a special, one-shot payment to give folks some immediate relief.
But that leads to the big question, right? Why now? I mean, a proposal for a payment this big, it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's pointing to a much, much deeper problem that advocates say has been brewing for years. So let's dig into the why behind this whole thing.
And really, the entire argument. It all comes down to one thing: the cost of living gap. Basically, there's this growing sense that the money seniors are getting just isn't keeping up with what things actually cost day to day. And that gap is getting dangerous.
So to really get a handle on this gap, we've got to talk about COLA, the cost of living adjustment. It's that annual raise that Social Security recipients get. And its whole job, its only job, is to make sure your benefits can buy the same amount of stuff this year as they did last year, even when prices go up. On paper, it's supposed to be a perfect system.
But in the real world, is it working? Well, according to people like Shannon Benton from the Senior Citizens League, the answer is a big no. She talks about a sharp erosion in what people can actually buy. She's arguing that those yearly COLA raises just aren't keeping up with the soaring costs of essentials. We're talking food, housing, and a big one, healthcare.
And listen, this gap is a huge deal because of just how much people depend on these benefits. I mean, look at this. For almost 40% of folks, Social Security isn't just some of their income, it's all of it. It's their entire income. So for that group, when the COLA doesn't cut it, there's literally no other safety net. That's it.
Okay, so if we all agree the COLA isn't quite doing its job, the obvious next question is why? What's broken? And that question takes us right into the really technical, nerdy heart of this whole debate. It's all about a disagreement over the formula, the math used to figure out inflation for seniors.
Let's break this down, because it can get a little confusing. Right now, the COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. Now, this index looks at what urban workers are buying. Things like gas for the commute, new clothes for the office. But here's the problem. Advocates say seniors spend their money completely differently. They spend way less on gas and way more on things like healthcare. So they want to switch to a different index, the CPIE, which is specifically designed to track spending for the elderly. It gives a lot more weight to those crucial costs.
And you might be thinking, is this just some niche idea? Not even close. When the Senior Citizens League actually surveyed retirees, the support for this change was just overwhelming. I mean, look at that number. A staggering 96% of the people they asked said, yes, the COLA should absolutely be based on how we actually spend our money.
And the numbers behind that feeling are pretty grim. You've got 1 in 5 seniors spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare alone. 4 out of 5 feel like the official inflation numbers are a joke and don't match what they see at the grocery store. And then there's this. 13% of seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's often below the poverty line. It's a tough reality.
So this idea of a one-time payment, it might sound kind of radical, right? But if you look back at our history, it's actually not a completely new concept. This whole conversation is really just the latest chapter in a long story of adjusting benefits when times get tough economically.
Yeah, I mean, this idea definitely builds on stuff we've seen before. Remember the Great Recession back in 2009? Social Security recipients got $250 checks then. And just a few years ago, there was a big push for a $200 a month increase. And of course, we all remember the stimulus checks, the economic impact payments during the pandemic. So you see, the idea of sending targeted direct cash, it's been done.
So history shows us it's possible, right? The government can step in and send direct help when things get bad. But, and this is a big but, it's really important to remember that just because it happened before doesn't mean it'll happen again. Every single proposal, including this one, has to fight its own battle through the current political and economic climate.
Okay, so we've covered the what, the $1,400 payment, we've covered the why, the COLA gap, and we've looked at the history. Now let's pull it all together. Where does this proposal actually stand today? And, let's be honest, what are its chances of happening?
You really have to understand how something like this becomes a reality. It's a journey. Right now, we are at the very beginning, steps 1 and 2. You have an advocacy group making a suggestion, and the media is talking about it. That's great. But for this to turn into actual money in someone's bank account, it needs to become a bill. That bill has to pass the House, and it has to pass the Senate. Then it has to be signed by the president. That is a very, very long and tricky road.
All right, so let's boil this whole thing down. What are the most important things to remember? Number 1, and this is the big one, this is just a proposal. It is not a law. Number 2, it's designed for all Social Security recipients. That means retirement, SSI, and SSDI. 3, the whole argument is that the current COLA formula is broken because it doesn't reflect what seniors actually spend money on. And finally, number 4, the fix they're suggesting has 2 parts. Change the formula for the future and give everyone a one-time payment to make up for the past. That's the whole shebang.
And all of this really leaves us with a much bigger, more fundamental question to think about. I mean, this whole $1,400 idea, it's just one possible answer to a huge challenge. As our economy keeps changing and the cost of everything keeps changing, how do we make sure our most important safety nets, things like Social Security, are changing right along with it?
That's the real conversation, and it's one we're definitely going to be having for a long, long time.
You know, if you try to keep up with the news about Social Security, wow, it's a lot. One minute you hear about benefit cuts, and the next it's all about increases. It can make your head spin, right? So in this explainer, we're going to slice through all that confusion. We'll get right to the facts, separating what's actually happening right now from what's just being proposed for the future.
All right, let's just ask the big question right up front. Is Social Security sending you more money? Well, the answer's a little complicated. For some people, yes, and for others, it's still a big debate. There's one major change that's already law and has led to significant payouts for a specific group of people. For everyone else, there are other big ideas on the table. Our goal today is to show you exactly what's what.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. Now we're looking ahead to what's on the horizon. Let's dive into some other big legislative proposals that could mean more money for a lot more people down the road.
Right now, there are really two big ideas floating around for a future raise. On one side, you have the Social Security Expansion Act, a proposal from Senator Bernie Sanders. It's pretty straightforward. Give everybody on Social Security an extra $200 a month, and to pay for it, raise taxes on the highest earners. On the other side is a more targeted approach. The idea here is to send those extra checks only to the lowest income beneficiaries. The theory is that they're the most likely to spend that money right away, giving the economy a more immediate jolt.
And just to put that first idea into real numbers, an extra $200 a month comes out to $2,400 a year. That would be a serious increase for every single person receiving benefits. But, and it's so important to remember this is still just a proposal. It has not been passed into law.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. There's a whole other vision for how to improve Social Security, and this one has nothing to do with passing new laws for benefit raises. Instead, it's all about making the system stronger from the inside out through better management and different tax policies.
And you can really see this viewpoint summed up in this quote from former President Donald Trump. He says, "I signed one big, beautiful bill and allowed no tax on Social Security for our great seniors." So for this approach, the key isn't necessarily bigger checks from the government, but letting seniors keep more of the money they already have by cutting taxes on their benefits.
So, wow, we've covered a lot of ground and some very different ideas for what's next. Let's try to pull this all together and figure out, what does this all mean for the future of your benefits? Okay, so when you boil it all down, there are really three distinct paths we've looked at. First, you have the Fairness Act. The status on that one is confirmed law, and it's already providing back pay and raises for that specific group affected by WEP and GPO. Then you have the two big future ideas. There's the legislative path, passing new laws to raise monthly checks for lots of people, and then there's the administrative vision, which is all about strengthening the system from within through efficiency and tax cuts.
And really, that brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? Bigger checks versus a stronger system. What's the right path forward? Should the main goal be getting more money into people's pockets every month to deal with the rising cost of living? Or should the priority be on creating a more efficient, streamlined, and fiscally sound system for the long haul? There's no easy answer, but whatever we decide will define the future of Social Security for tens of millions of Americans.
Today, we are really getting into the weeds on the future of supplemental security income, SSI. There are some huge proposals out there that could completely change the game for millions of people. We're talking bigger monthly checks and a massive jump in how much you're allowed to save. But when you peel back all the layers, all these proposals really come down to one single critical question. Is SSI, as it stands today, actually keeping up with the cost of living? This is the core problem we're going to unpack, because for almost 8 million people, the answer to that question really dictates their entire life. So let's just step back for a second. SSI was created, over 50 years ago, and it had a super clear mission: to be a financial safety net. It was designed to fight poverty, and for a while, it did its job. But over the years, a gap started to appear, and that gap has just kept growing, leaving the whole program and the people who rely on it falling further and further behind. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what exactly is SSI? It's a really important federal program run by the Social Security Administration that gives a monthly income to adults and kids with disabilities, and also to folks 65 and older who have very little in terms of income and resources. And this right here is the absolute key to its original design. The whole idea from day one was that the payments would keep people right at the federal poverty line. Not way above it, sure, but definitely not below it. It was supposed to be a floor, a baseline of financial stability. And remembering that original goal is so important for understanding where things are today.
So this idea of falling behind, it isn't just a feeling. It's not a hunch that things are getting tougher. It is a measurable, quantifiable gap. And the numbers, well, they tell a really, really clear story about the difference between the program's original promise and today's reality.
Okay, let's start with the benchmark. For 2025, the official federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year. But nobody pays their rent once a year, right? So let's break that down by month. That comes out to $1,304. Remember that number. It's our baseline. Now let's look at what's actually happening for someone on SSI. The absolute maximum federal payment a single person can get in 2025 is $967 a month. That's the ceiling. You can't get a dollar more from the federal government. So right off the bat, you can see those two numbers are not the same. And when you put those two numbers right next to each other, like in this chart, wow, the gap just jumps right out at you. It's not even close. The maximum benefit falls way short of that poverty line, and this difference has just been getting worse year after year. So do the math. The difference is $337. That's the hole people find themselves in every single month. To put it another way, the maximum SSI check is nearly 35% below the very poverty line it was created to meet. That is a massive gap to cover when you're on a fixed income. Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But how do you fix it? Well, there are some pretty concrete plans being floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head-on.
And this proposal is getting a lot of attention. In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying